Well, hello everybody, and welcome to the Artistry House, the home of the British Institute of Professional Photography. And we've got a real good interview for you this afternoon. We've got Michael Lane, who's our company solicitor. He's actually been our company secretary for 14 years and been involved with the British Institute of Professional Photography for the last 30. So I'd like to welcome you, Michael. Thank you for joining us and thank you for your time.
Good afternoon.
I hope you're not going to send me a big bill for this, by the way. Just saying. So my first question is, what's the difference between a lawyer and solicitor?
Not a great deal. A solicitor is a particular qualification. Lawyer is just a generic term for anybody that practices law. So if you're a barrister, solicitor, licensed conveyancer, legal executive, you're a lawyer, but then you have your particular qualification. So probably the oldest qualification, I think, is solicitor. And solicitors practice usually in different areas of law, anything from conveyancing, employment, commercial, corporate, what you will.
Brilliant. That's a great answer, and always wants to know. One of the things we're going to talk about today is some of the questions that we've been asked by some of our members regarding contracts and studios and things like that. And we've kind of discussed off camera that it's going to have to be quite generic because it depends on the particular contracts and the wording used. But before we get into that, Michael, if you don't mind, can you just tell us a little bit about yourself and the business that you run and what kind of work that you do generally?
Yeah, sure. Well, as we said, I'm a qualified solicitor. I work for a firm called Gisby Harrison based in Hertfordshire. We've provided general legal services to the BIPP for probably, I would guess, 30 or 40 years before my involvement, but I've certainly been involved with BIPP for more than 30 years. We're a general legal practice, and I run that as managing partner. I've got 23 lawyers that work for me.
23 lawyers, wow.
23 lawyers, all at the moment working from home, which works but has its own challenges, obviously.
Yes.
My background, I started off as a litigator and an employment lawyer, but over the years have morphed into more of a general commercial lawyer, advising businesses of all types, all sizes, all shapes, and all industries. Yeah,
and our thanks to you as, I guess, one of the unsung heroes for the Institute's recent kind of dark stain is probably what I want to call it. And I know you were very kind of key in helping the directors get through that bit of a mess that we had. But less said about that, the best, I think. So. Indeed. So we're going to get on to some of these questions. Thank you for that, Michael. So we've had some questions from wedding photographers and some portrait photographers. And I know that the answers probably are not going to be as detailed as the people who sent the questions in would like, but as we're going to try and explain, first thing is that they all should have contracts with their customers. It's really important, the very first thing that they should do. But secondly, because of the industry that we're in, it would seem that a lot of photographers' contracts are kind of bespoke or slightly different to everybody else's. So for you to give advice, it's very difficult without actually physically seeing and sit with the actual detail and the language used in the contract. So the first one was about the deposits. Do they have to be refunded if a wedding date has been changed or cancelled and the photographer can't shoot the new date? Do they have to give the deposit back or not?
Right. Well, as you say, the most important thing whenever there is any question about what should or shouldn't happen is pull out the contract and read the small print to see what was actually agreed. Because in principle, you can agree anything between two parties and what was agreed will be enforceable. Obviously, where you're dealing with members of the public, as you will usually when it's a wedding contract, then there are certain restrictions, so contracts have to be reasonable to be enforceable. But let's assume that most members have got contracts that they've been using for years and they're reasonable and they're well thought out and they've got their terms. Then I would say pull it out and read it. Okay. Now, with what is happening at the moment, I think it's probably important to realise that the COVID-19 situation is completely unforeseeable. Clearly, nobody's fault as far as a wedding photographer is concerned. And weddings aren't taking place up and down the country, and we don't know when they're going to be able to take place. That being an unforeseen event that is nobody's fault is often known as the force majeure event. So if contracts have clauses in that say that in the event of force majeure, certain consequences will follow, then that is going to apply in those circumstances. So have a look and see what they say.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes they will say that in the event of it, that a wedding can't take place through nobody's fault, then the deposit is refundable. Sometimes it will say that it's not refundable, but otherwise everybody is released from all further obligations. But what the contract says, as a general rule, is going to apply. If you've got a situation where there are no terms, and so it's just been a verbal agreement that somebody will shoot the wedding, then the general rule is going to be that the deposit is going to be refundable, because the contract, having been frustrated and unable to go ahead, you're going to step back and essentially there is no contract.
Mm-hmm.
So probably it's going to be. I say probably because there is actually a legal argument to say that if the photographer has incurred actual expenses as a consequence and has used the deposit to pay expenses, then he can deduct those expenses before refunding.
Well, that's an interesting point.
So
Kind of the short answer is that if a photographer was due to shoot a wedding that's now been postponed and he can't shoot the new date, then really he should be giving back the deposit.
Almost certainly.
Yeah. Okay. That's good.
Almost certainly. But can I just say on that point? And certainly what we're finding, because we're getting lots of questions on these, and particularly I'm getting questions actually from a number of wedding venues that I act for.
Yes.
And I am finding that most people are actually being reasonable.
Yes. I think that's part as well. Whatever the contract says and whatever the photographer and whatever the law says to a certain extent, I think we've got to bear in mind that, especially with wedding photography, you're dealing with people's emotions and things like that. Yeah. And it's also the damage that it could do to their brand if they kind of really dig down and say, look, you're not going to get your money back. You're not going to get your deposit back. I can't shoot it. Then I suppose they've got to take that into account. What damage?
Yeah, I think that's right. And to an extent, you do have to put the law to one side. It's useful to know what your legal position is so that you know how far you can push it or be pushed, as the case may be, if it comes to that. But yeah, certainly I'm finding at the moment that most people are quite happy to talk. And if everybody is sensible, yes, and if there's give and take and there's attempt to make arrangements, then everybody, from people I know that are arranging weddings to the wedding venues and everybody else that's involved in the process, actually with the goodwill that seems to be around, that is getting everybody the best outcome. And clearly going forward is going to keep everybody in business and keep customers, and hopefully when we'll get back to normality, yeah, then things can be rearranged. So I would say, yeah, undoubtedly the message is be sensible rather than be legalistic.
Yeah, keep talking and read your own contract is the thing to come out. And the next question was about force majeure, which we actually kind of covered. Is this a force majeure situation? And I think what you've said there actually is probably it will be classed as that without.
I think without a shadow of a doubt. I think at the moment the government have said it is illegal to have weddings in simple terms. Therefore, it is impossible for a contract to be performed on a particular date. Now, one thing you've got to be careful about, because I know this has arisen, is that I've been asked recently a number of times about contracts for weddings that are taking place in July or August or September of this year, or even weddings for 2020. And of course, at the moment, we simply don't know whether those weddings are going to be able to take place. So although it's illegal for a wedding to take place today, we don't know that will still be the case in June, July, or whenever.
Yes.
And so unfortunately, that does mean that people have to wait to find out if there is a force majeure event that affects their particular contract.
Yes. Yes.
And whilst that's causing problems because people would like certainty, they would like to be able to plan, particularly obviously the customers, the brides and the grooms. Yeah. Unfortunately, they have to sit and wait because a September wedding might take place entirely normally and everybody might be able to attend if they find the tests that we need and the vaccinations that we need. The world might be a normal place in September. You can't assume it's going not to be. But assuming that the event is still, and the lockdown is still in place at the date of the wedding, then definitely force majeure.
Yeah, okay, brilliant. So there's one here about what is a legal standing do photographers have to claim full payment on cancellation if the client has wedding insurance and the wedding is cancelled?
Probably not an awful lot, but having said that, it is very useful if there is wedding insurance. Certainly most terms and conditions issued by wedding photographers that I've seen will say, we strongly recommend that you take out wedding insurance in the case of unforeseen events.
Yes.
And those sort of terms are very useful to have in contracts because they have a knock-on effect on other clauses that are reasonable. So, for example, clauses that say you will forfeit your deposit in the event of a force majeure event become more likely to be reasonable if you've also said to the client, well, take out wedding insurance because that will cover your deposit in that event. You've given them an opportunity to not lose out and for everybody to be protected.
And I think it's important. It's kind of important to say there, and we kind of spoke off camera off before we recorded that if a bride and groom do have wedding insurance that they can claim against, that doesn't necessarily mean that the photographer has any right to that. It's up to because they're the third party. It's the first party that took out the
Yes, that's right. You've got to bear in mind that an insurance policy is just simply a contract between an insurance company and the person that took out the policy, which is going to be the bride or groom.
Yeah, and the photographer has no legal right to ask for that any of that.
Unless it was, to be technical, unless it was specifically made for the benefit of the photographer and therefore it's got third-party rights. No, as in practical terms, I think photographers should assume that they won't be able to claim under a bride or groom's insurance policy. But what they can do, of course, is encourage the bride and groom to make the claim.
Yes.
Certainly, the bride and groom can't make a claim and then say unless they've paid the photographer or got an obligation to pay the photographer, because in policies of insurance are there to provide cover for obligations that the bride and groom have got. They're not there just to provide a windfall.
Yeah, fascinating stuff, really is. Okay, next question. Some business insurances cover for loss of earnings, but have been refused as their business is closed due to the shutdown, not a result of personal closure. What is their legal standing? Again,
it's a case of read the policy. If you have taken out a policy that is all singing, all dancing, bells and whistles policy, a policy that's probably cost a lot of money, then obviously it's far more likely to cover a whole range of situations and be claimable. Clearly, if you have a cheaper policy, the tendency is that there's lots of exclusion clauses in it and lots of things that are not covered. You get what you pay for in life.
Yeah, and the advice would be to take it to a solicitor or a lawyer to...
Well, not necessarily. I would say read the policy to see if you're covered and usually speak to your insurance broker because they're going to be the experts on knowing whether you're covered and what you can get away with.
Okay. And last one from the wedding photographers is, are there any ombudsmen or adjudicators that photographers can go to if they feel their personal situation in their own eyes is incorrect, i.e., feel they should have received the 80% grants, etc., which is a pretty simple.
Again, it depends on exactly what sort of claim somebody has been making and which has been refused. I'm not aware of any, but certainly if, for example, it was a claim against a local authority for local authority grant, then there is a local authority ombudsman.
Yes.
That deals with complaints about local authorities. Yes. I have to say, I can't, in all honesty, say I've ever read it or whether I'm not familiar with whether it covers specifically grants, but I suspect that it does. In relation to whether you're covered under the furlough scheme or the equivalent scheme for self-employed people, I don't believe there is an ombudsman or adjudicator, but obviously there are rights of appeal if they are.
Yeah, and I believe there's actually been quite a bit on our Facebook recently about people applying for some of the grants, the 80% one for self-employed, and some have been denied, but there is a process that they can go through to appeal it. I do know that. So
there is, certainly, yeah.
So there was then a bunch of questions from Studio Portraits, but we discussed some of them, which were things like about the safety at work for both their employees and for customers who come in, as about do they have to supply or provide PPE, liability if somebody gets corona while visiting the studio, and as we discussed, it's something that you really can't give advice on at the moment because we don't know what the law is going to be yet. Because it hasn't.
I think that's exactly the point. Obviously, I can quite understand that everybody who's sitting at home and anxious to reopen their studio or reopen any form of business wants to know what they have got to do, or when they can open, how they're going to be able to do it. And I mean, all one can say in general terms is, at the moment, opening a photographic studio and having a member of the public visit would simply be illegal because members of the public can only leave home for certain designated purposes, and visiting a photographer isn't going to be one of those purposes.
Yes.
But having said so, undoubtedly, as the lockdown is eased, there will be further guidance, and it will be eased for particular types of businesses or particular types of industry. But what there's obviously the government website is very good on guidance. So the legal regulations which they're issuing are quite technical and in truth quite short. So there's not a lot to read in them. Mm-hmm. But the government website guidance on coronavirus gives lots of guidance about opening your business, how to carry out risk assessments, and what to do to protect yourself, your staff, and members of the public that are visiting. Yeah. And if you read and follow that guidance, then you really can't go wrong. Probably the most important thing to bear in mind is that even in normal times, if you're running any business or if you've got people, members of the public visiting your business, you do have an obligation to make sure that it's a safe place and reasonably safe for anybody to visit. And so that, normally that would mean you make sure that there are no trailing cables, no electrical hazards, the roof's not falling in, etc. Now, COVID obviously adds another level of risk assessment to that, but there will be there's already guidance for the businesses that can open in terms of making sure that you can social distance, that if needs be, people have got masks, making sure that there are antiseptic hand wipes or whatever available, and all that type of thing that apply specifically to COVID. But the guidance is all there. Yeah. If I can just deal specifically with your question about if somebody visits your premises and they came down with COVID, could you be liable as a result? Clearly that could be a worry because somebody could suffer very serious injury or worse. And the answer is, in theory, you could be. If somebody comes to your premises and as a result of you not taking proper care, they then contract any disease or injury, that could be your responsibility. Yeah. But it's not something I would be losing any sleep over if I was a studio photographer.
It'd be very, very difficult to prove as well, wouldn't it?
I think that's exactly the point. I mean, the first thing is, any studio photographer opening would be very, very ill-advised not to carry out, sensible precautions. Yes. So clearly they ought to be self-distancing, making sure there's hand-washing facilities and the like. If they have carried out sensible precautions and have got proper risk assessments and followed the government's guidance, then anybody visiting their premises, the reality is, will have no doubt visited lots of premises, and they would have been to Tesco's and Sainsbury's and been to the park and visited lots of other places. And so if a week later they were to come down with COVID, how on earth would you track it down to a particular visit in a particular place? Yeah. So the risk of a claim in reality is almost non-existent.
Yeah. One of the other questions that's actually just sprang into my mind is, obviously, and again, I'm not sure that you'll be able to answer this from a legal point of view, but when businesses start reopening, they're going to be reopened in kind of categories, if you will. So, for example, bakeries or Greggs and things like that, where people don't sit down, they're not restaurants, they don't go in, they hand contactless payment, they'll receive goods. And a hairdresser or a barber, where they're having physical contact, you can imagine that's going to be much further down the line where they're having physical contact. So I kind of wonder where photographic studios are going to fall, because they don't so much have to have physical contact with the clients, and I'm not sure what industry we're going to be aligned with, or what other kind of service-based industry that we're going to sit in with, where it's going to be reopened. Do you have any thoughts?
No, I think that's absolutely right, and I think nobody can tell at the moment, because until they start releasing the lockdown in stages and tell us what you can do for the next stage, we won't know. But my guess would be that actually a photographic studio is probably going to be no different to a firm of accountants or a firm of solicitors.
Yes.
Because clearly, if you come along to see your lawyer for a legal meeting, you're going to be coming into their building. You are going to be sitting in a meeting room across a desk and having a conversation. Yes. And really, in practical terms, in a COVID risk term, is that really any different to somebody coming into a studio and having a portrait photo?
Yes. Yeah.
So I'm guessing there'll be a wide range that will cover all those types of businesses, and probably you'll be able to open about the same time as I can.
Well, on that note, Michael, I'd like to thank you very much for your time. That was fascinating, really interesting as always when speaking to you. I always learn something, and I'm sure our members will appreciate the advice that you've given. But I think to summarise is read what's in your own contract, which
always read the contract.
Don't actually do. And we've been kind of speaking about setting up some kind of templates for photographers in the future that will look at better contracts and try and standardise them across our organisation anyway. So read contracts, be sensible, be kind, and it's just still a matter of kind of waiting and reading government or waiting for government announcements and reading the detail in that when they come. But everybody's in the same situation.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Michael.
Okay, my pleasure.
Speak soon.
See you later. Thanks. Bye-bye.